So, Anders, can you please?
Thank you. So, thanks all. Wonderful to see you all. Bit of background. A few of you may not know me. Anders Thostrup, so I'm with Shell, and my day job is principal engineer of data standards in the projects and engineering organization. So I'm in what's technically called the data definition owner for projects and engineering, but work a lot with operations as well to meet their requirements. And internally, we are working on governance. So we've appointed what we call discipline data leads that own the different data requirements of the different disciplines. And so we're really working on our data requirements and going data centric. But a lot of our data comes from the outside world. So therefore, we invest in international standards. So I'm part of the CIFAR steering committee in IOGP and also the information standards subcommittee in IOGP, as well as USPI, where I'm very actively participating in FL3DMS. And one of the other things I do is try and drive collaboration between the different standards organizations, so very actively driving MOUs between all the different parties. And Hugo, you're already alluding to that. So that's a little bit about what I do in this standards world. And we're really, I think, going somewhere with the collaboration. It's been very good also over the last 3 days. What I'll tell you a little bit about now is, and I'll try and keep it brief, is FL3DMS. Some of you are maybe new to FL3DMS, so I'll tell you what first the standard is and what we have available. And then I'll talk a little bit about what we are developing in the next release, which will be a major release actually in terms of new content. So, but let's start with the objectives. We did a survey also last year, apart from the video and all the other things we did, and I'll share a little bit from the survey. It's kind of insightful, and then talk about the current standard and the next release. But first, the objectives. These are the old objectives that we developed, I think, 4 or 5 years ago when we kicked off the work on the standard, and it's very aligned to what we also did for CIFAS. We said we're going to create a practical standard that you can put into your contract and that you can give to your suppliers. If you're an owner operator, you can give it to your EPCs. If you're an EPC and you have subcontractors working for you, you can use it to give to your subcontractors. So those are really the users. It should be a practical standard. Here it says used by owner operators, but it could also equally well be used by EPCs. And it's really it should be based on current best practice. So not a big academic exercise, but things that work, that we know that work in practice to optimize the value of 3D models. And it's not just for optimizing the value of the 3D model in projects, but also in operations. And part of that is, of course, supporting the digital twin, and also very important, the last bullet there. The idea is, in the first instance, that it's applicable to proprietary 3D modeling systems. So we're not going to try and create a competitor to Hexagon and Aviva and Autodesk and all the others in terms of a neutral standard, but we're more looking at how do you organize your information, what information should be in your model, and how do you organize that information so that you can get the value out of the 3D model, because a 3D model is a big investment to create. So you should try and get the max value out of it. We may evolve the standard into a neutral format over time, but that has got a very long horizon if we're going to do it. And the other important aspect is that the standard is application agnostic, so it should work for all the different software suppliers out there. The way the illustration at the bottom shows the CIFAS structure of the different requirements in CIFAS, and there's a gray box on the right, which is referring to other information standards that cover scope that is not covered inside CIFAS itself. CIFAS is one of our MOU partners, and FL3DMS fits out there because CIFAS doesn't specify any 3D model requirements itself, but it points to FL3DMS as its 3D model partner. And you'll hear a bit more about that later on. We have a lot of content in FL3DMS that refers back to CIFAS and that builds on CIFAS as well. So that's a two-way relationship. Why are we doing it? Well, over the last 20 years, certainly looking inside Shell, but I think also looking across the industry, we see that the quality of 3D models has been deteriorating. The way we are developing them have less structure, less rigor than they used to have. And what's come back in our survey helps us also understand perhaps why that is. Why is the quality of these 3D models falling? One of the key reasons is that we don't standardize the content very well. So there wasn't, before we started FL3DMS, there wasn't a industry standard for how a 3D model should be structured and what content is expected to be in it. And that's a gap we're trying to fill. That was actually a gap that was identified by IOGP, I think in 2016, and subsequent to that, we thought let's try and work and fill that gap. What we can see is also there's quite there's a lot of contracts issued without 3D model specifications, and the second thing we see is there's relatively low use of standards in the people that responded to our surveys. So we see a lot of different types of requirements being issued where they are being issued, and not a very consistent picture across the industry. And that's one of the key problems we're seeking to address with FL3DMS. What we also saw in our survey was that the use of 3D models is very mixed. So we most of us use 3D models for design activities, but the various uses of 3D models in operations, in maintenance, in integrity management, and so on, it's a very mixed picture. And so there's quite a lot of 3D model owners that are not using the 3D model for all the different use cases, and they are not getting the value out of the 3D models that you might expect. That may also be tied to the quality issues, because if you don't have a good quality 3D model, you're not likely to use it in operations and maintenance because people don't trust it. So part of this driving standardization is also driving up the quality so that we can get more value out of the 3D model for the full life cycle. And at the bottom there, you've got the usage within projects and assets and percentages of projects and assets using the 3D model. And you can see in just over half, it's less than 50% of the project or asset teams that are using the 3D model. And of course, we want to drive up the usage of the model so that you don't have to go out to take a look all the time, which for some assets can be quite difficult. So what have we delivered over the last, I think it's 3 or 4 years that we've been working on the standard. So we've delivered a number of different things, it's not just a technical standard, that's the first thing we should say, but the main bit of course, is the technical standard. So we have a requirements document, which talks about the 3D model configuration and the content requirements and the deliverables and the handover requirements of the 3D model. We have a requirements matrix that lists all the objects we expect to see in the 3D model, and we've aligned the way that has been written with the IOGP requirements writing guide. By the way, it's a very good guide. If you have to write requirements, we really also recommend that you adopt that one. And we're also aligning with NORSOC, the Z020. That's perhaps the most mature standard that is out there, Norwegian standard. But it's very mature. So we've said we want FL3DMS to be consistent with and complementary to the NORSOC standard. What we also decided to do is do a business case. Why look after the 3D model for the full life cycle, try and articulate all the different use cases. So there we looked at the value of life cycle management, we looked at the value of standardization, but also the cost of keeping the 3D model up for the full life cycle. And we got a good return on investment. It depends a little bit on how far you go with the use of the 3D model, but it's somewhere between 2 and 5. And the last one is for owner operators, because one thing we see is the competences within owner operators is low related to 3D models. The EPCs have a lot of competences, a lot of interest in it, but the owner operators don't really know how to look after the 3D models. So it's not just an issue of getting the 3D model from your EPC contractor in a complete state that has the information in it that you're after, but it's also about how do you keep that up to date for the full life cycle? And what do you need to put in place in terms of hosting, in terms of support, in terms of agreements with your integrated services contractors to keep that model alive so that it retains its value for the full life cycle? One of the things we've decided also over the last year is to share the standard for free. So a standard is the value of a standard is proportionate to its quality, but it's also proportionate to its use. So we said we want the standard to be used, so we followed suite with CFOS and DEXB, and also published our standard for free on the internet, and you can download it from our website. My last slide is a quick update. Well, quick update is there's quite a lot on it about what we are working on delivering currently, and that's what we've been working on for the last 3 days. A lot of content, a lot of new content, and it's concerned with a number of different things. The first one is around handover, both handover from skid suppliers to EPCs, because there's a lot of pain there. It's our favorite subject. Don't ask about skids in any questions, please, because we will keep you here till midnight at least if you do. And then the other one is, of course, the handover from the EPCs to the owner. Trust Barjan to ask the question. The other one is last year, one of our sister standards matured. That's the CII Advanced Work Packaging standard, and part of that, these work packs are defined in the 3D model. So there's some requirements for 3D models. So we're embedding these CII advanced work packaging requirements also in our standard, just like CFOS is embedding it in CFOS, and in that way we can support advanced work packaging and drive down the cost of construction. Then we have some as-built and quality related requirements that we are adding again to drive up the quality, of course, of the model and the value of the model for the life cycle. And we are developing a data model and a data dictionary that's aligned with CFOS, DEXB, and CII AWP. And you'll see also the reference to all the CFOS objects within the standard. So we are getting really integrated in this sense. And we're also identifying all the 3D model deliverables in terms of drawings and lists and so on that come from the 3D model. And again, we're numbering them according to the CFOS requirements numbering. We're working on an implementation guide, which will also help people implement the standard. That is to make sure we give some sort of training, because we see that there's a competence issue out there. So one thing is having a standard, but we also realize we need to help particular owner operators in how do you implement that standard. So the implementation guide, it follows, for those familiar with CFOS, it follows a little bit the same principle. CFOS has this lollipop model, which is a step-by-step process by which you implement the standard, and we're developing a similar step-by-step process for implementation. And then last but not least, one of the big challenges related to 3D model management is CATS and spec management. And there we are working on a terms of reference and a white paper. Again, particularly to the owner operators, this is important because CATS and spec management, it's a bit of a black box. Not a lot of owner operators understand what that is. And we do a lot of rework. Every time we start a new 3D model, we develop a lot of catalog items, which have, you could say, we should be able to reuse from project to project. So we're not very smart about how we manage catalogs, and there's a lot of unnecessary delay and also a lot of unnecessary spend. So we're looking at, with these terms of reference, what is it we can do in FL3DMS to help drive down the cost of catalog management at industry level. So that gives you a summary of the things we're working on at the moment. So quite a lot of stuff in the pipeline for the next release. A lot of people have contributed in this room to these different components, so really appreciate the effort. I wanted to just finish with that. It's a little bit similar to the previous slide. There's a few additional contributors on there, also some non-members that have contributed. So I wanted to recognize them all for their effort and their input, and finish by thanking